Chapter 5. We'd been at the farm for about 7 months and thought by now Esther's attitude would be back to normal. We were wrong. Our formerly sweet, laid-back pig daughter still had a terrible attitude. While we've heard this kind of insolent phase often occurs with teenage girls, we did not expect it with our still young sow. It was obvious that we had fence issues everywhere, and nobody seemed more focused on bringing them to our attention than Esther. Attempted jailbreaks were a daily occurrence. Even with me or Derek as a personal escort, she made it her sole purpose in life to find and exploit any weaknesses she came across. She would get funny sometimes. She'd just stop at a spot she knew was questionable and look back at us. It was like she was saying, "You know I can get out there anytime I want, right?" She seemed to be taunting us. Sometimes she'd just remind us she knew there was more to see on the other side of the fence, but she wouldn't push it. Other days, nothing could hold her back. Since the move, Esther's go-to place has always been the woods. There must be something about the forest floor that pigs absolutely love. The ground is soft, and when she would get out there, she'd constantly look for bugs and roots to eat. We'd seen the same behavior in our backyard in Georgetown, but now it was on a much larger scale. At the farm, we finally got to see firsthand how far a pig will travel in a day when it has the space and the ability to do so. Esther would literally walk for miles, going from one end of the farm to the other. Sometimes she and I would be out for just 20 to 30 minutes, doing a quick lap of the space we intended her to explore. But more often than not, a quick walk would turn into a 2-hour adventure. Esther would get so angry when we told her she couldn't explore wherever she wanted. We'd freed her from the suburbs and introduced her to this wide open environment, full of mystery and adventure, and here we were reining her in. For fear she'd get hit by a train or shot by a hunter, or the police, or God knows what else might happen. So we were doing what we thought was best. But as she saw it, we were keeping her from following her dreams. We were those awful parents ruining their teenage child's lives by not allowing them to be free and explore the world. It kind of reminded me of my parents. When I was in high school, they didn't want me going to outdoor parties with my friends. At the time, I couldn't understand what their problem was. Why they were so concerned about a bunch of hormonal teenagers getting their hands on alcohol and having parties in the middle of a forested ravine. What could go wrong? Granted, I don't think Esther was looking to hook up with a bunch of drunk wild boars in the woods, although you'd better believe we'd get a few more great book chapters out of it if she did. And my parents obviously weren't being as unreasonable as I thought they were at the time, although I'll never admit that to their faces. With Esther, I suddenly found myself thinking and feeling like any parent who feels they have a problem child on their hands. Everything we were doing to protect her came from a place of love. Oh my God. I even sound like my mother. It's worse than I thought. But seriously, we wanted Esther to have fun and love her new home. The property just wasn't ready for her yet, and she didn't understand that. We felt awful about it, but we had no choice but to get firm with her and make sure we always had her eyes on her. We would accompany her everywhere she went. She didn't appreciate the chaperoning one little bit. She'd try to evade us every chance she got, and of course, it was no picnic for us wardens either. It's not like we had all this free time and energy to shadow Esther every time she started to wander, which was often. I've never been particularly drawn to the idea of being a parent. I've always been an animal person. I like pets. Hell, I love pets. That's my idea of family. Tiny humans, not so much. At first, that was a bit of an issue for Derek and me, because he wanted kids, to the point that it was almost a game changer for us. Funny enough, over time, each of us started coming around to the other's position. I became more willing to start an actual family, while he became less so. Here we are 15 years later, and still no kids. Well, no human kids. Either way, I never understood the whole super protective, keep your kid in a bubble behavior I had seen from some of my friends. A few years before Esther came along, I was in Amsterdam with my best friend, Michelle. The same friend who would later unfriend me on Facebook for missing a housewarming party. One night, we went on a pub crawl, and at one stop I realized I'd lost sight of her. I eventually found her on the patio, leaning against a wall with a drink in her hand, sobbing like a baby. I was immediately concerned and asked her what was wrong. Did somebody hurt you? Steal your wallet? You know, I've always had a flair for dramatics, but I'm even more prone to hyperbole if I've had a drink or two. She replied, I miss my daughter. Not having expected something so minor to be the problem, I immediately started to laugh. We've only been gone for a week and a half, I said. Get a hold of yourself. I'm typically a sensitive guy, but I wasn't exactly sober, and this clearly wasn't my finest moment. Later on, I felt bad about it, but to be totally honest, I really didn't understand how you could miss somebody so much that you'd be driven to tears after only 10 days apart. Then Esther entered our lives. And on the first trip Derek and I took, that lasted more than a couple of days, I found myself crying my eyes out. I stood on a beach in Negril, Jamaica, watching the most incredible sunset, a pina colada in my hand, and there was Derek laughing at me while I cried about how much I missed my daughter. My 650-pound, four-legged, snouted daughter. I had become that parent I used to think was so ridiculous, and I never saw it coming. I should probably take the time to apologize to my parents for being so obnoxiously insistent in my teen years that they were ruining my life, or whining about how mean they were for not letting me do every crazy thing I tried to do. And also to Michelle for laughing at her when she cried. Who would have thought that a pig we couldn't keep out of the woods would be the thing that made me realize what an insensitive jerk I had been? I wish I knew why that parental feeling had come with Esther. I've always had dogs and cats in my life, and I've loved every single one of them very much. But there's something different about Esther. She's not like a dog or a cat. I don't know if it's her eyes, the particular way she looks at you, or if it's the way she behaves, that sense of mischief and curiosity we see every day. Maybe it's just the knowledge of what her life could have been, and how guilty I feel for supporting the meat industry for so long. I'm not 100% sure exactly what it is, but I'm sure there is something undeniably human-like about her, and it completely changed me. It brought out a feeling of needing to protect her, in a way I assume new parents feel about their infant children. And while I realize it's not easy to protect children in today's world, at least most parents have the advantage of being bigger than their kids. I had a child triple my size, and then some, who desperately wanted to forage in the woods with all the accompanying dangers. In a sense, it made me all the more relieved that we finally had her out on a farm, despite the many challenges that came along with it. She must have felt awfully constricted in our small house and backyard. Out here, she could finally be herself. And now, I can't even imagine how horrifying it must be for pigs squeezed into tiny cages at a factory farm. I just wish we could save every pig from that fate. When we first moved to the farm, I'd leave the house not dressed properly to be out for long, especially in the mornings. I was usually still wearing my super fancy bathrobe and maybe a pair of plaid flannel pants, assuming the weather required pants, that is. And my new go-to shoes since moving to the farm, Crocs. I know what you might be thinking. I can't believe the father of a fashion icon like Esther T.W. Pig wears Crocs. But if you are, you obviously haven't tried them. They're like little ugly clouds for your feet. Heaven, you're not likely to find me hitting the town in such frightful footwear, but when you're spending several hours a day on pig patrol, your top priority is happy feet, not striking poses on the red carpet. I guess that's just another concession I've made in becoming a parent. Anyway, my questionable outfits and I would end up on parade in the forest, Esther loving every minute of it, while I was running through all of the possible things that could go wrong. I'd be trying to figure out if she was going to turn around on her own or if I was going to need to start World War Pig by turning her around myself. What if she made a run for it and managed to get to the road? I was in a bathrobe, for Christ's sake. Can you imagine this scene when driving to work on a Tuesday morning? You happen across a man in the middle of the road, wearing a robe, probably an open robe, fighting with a 650-pound pig. No one needs to see that, particularly not one of my neighbors. I soon adjusted my outfits to include pants and shirts at all times, if for no other reason than to avoid potentially humiliating situations. I still wore my Crocs, though. You have to pry my Crocs off my cold, dead, probably from too much walking, feet. As the weeks went by, I had also learned that problems would always occur when we were trying to direct Esther. She would get angry when we tried to make her change directions. Sometimes she'd freak out and bite, while other times she'd see that we were going to block her and she'd duck and try to go around us. And she always had the advantage because she was low to the ground. She could burrow under sticks that were poking me in the face, making it incredibly hard to keep up with her. And she's not like a dog. She doesn't like being chased any more than she likes being blocked, so that doesn't help the situation. But what choice did I have? We had seen previously that the minute Esther thinks she has you beat, you're done for. We couldn't let her win the battle of the woods. If we did, we'd never keep her contained. So we didn't let up, and neither did she. We'd pick up a big stick and block her way with it, using trees to brace one end of the stick, holding the other end so she couldn't pass. She'd bite at the stick and try to run, which we hated because it was usually across rough terrain. While that was dangerous for us, our biggest fear was that she would injure herself. We knew that pigs, particularly very large ones, are prone to problems with their legs and hips. It becomes an even bigger problem as they get a bit older. They're bred to grow so large so quickly that their joints, ligaments, tendons, and so on can't handle the stress of the weight of their bodies. Also, veterinarians typically aren't as savvy about pigs as they are about dogs and cats, because it's not common for somebody to come in with a 650-pound pig and ask the vet to do thousands of dollars worth of surgery to fix an injured leg. I remember a vet who came to our farm to see one of the new pigs from Terra Sanctuary. It was shortly after they arrived, and we were still looking for ways to treat Bear and hopefully get him back on his feet. The regular vet was busy, so he sent a colleague. We had no problem with that, until we told the new vet how old Bear was. He looked back at us, a confused look on his face, and asked, "How long do pigs live?" I couldn't believe he'd asked that question. I didn't know how long pigs lived until we met Esther, but I hadn't spent the better part of a decade getting a degree in veterinary medicine. Wasn't the natural lifespan of a pig something they should have covered in school? How was this not something he knew, or could at least vaguely estimate? A similar thing occurred more recently. When an intern at an animal hospital was looking at Esther, he said, "Well, you know, at 2.5 years, she's getting a bit late in life." I was shocked all over again. All these doctors seem to know are commercial statistics. Yes, 2.5 years is late in life for a commercially farmed sow. But those are teenage years for a pig who's been allowed to live a natural life. How could they possibly not know that? But they don't. So when a pig gets injured, it's a really scary proposition because there's a good chance the vet has never had to deal with it before, or has done it so few times that it's still a learning process. I don't want my pig daughter to be some doctor's experiment. I was always so scared that Esther would trip on a tree root or a little hole in the ground hidden beneath the fallen leaves, and that she'd twist or break a leg. There's that flair for dramatics again. I'd get myself all worked up in this terrifying scenario, finding myself thinking of ways I could lift Esther from the bottom of a ravine with her broken leg so we could whisk her off to Ontario Veterinary College for surgery. I would think all this while she was just be walking toward the forest and I hadn't even attempted to cross the fence. What can I say? My mind gets ahead of me sometimes. So whenever I actually did have to struggle with Esther to keep her in bounds, my worries would go into overdrive. The worst part, after one of these little fights, she would be mad for days. If you think a relative or significant other can hold a grudge, believe me, they have nothing on a pig. After a big fight, she'd snap at Derek or even at one of the guests. Sometimes she wouldn't let me cuddle with her after a fracas, and I loved to cuddle with her. It was the perfect storm of a teenage pig with an attitude in new surroundings. That made it both physically and emotionally challenging for all of us, and we felt the stress all the time. This behavior change made it really hard to get work done, because I was constantly on the move with Esther. For a large lady, she covers a surprising amount of territory. Bottom line, we really needed those fences to be up and working as soon as possible. I'd have deadlines to meet, but instead I'd be out in the forest with no cell signal or a dead battery, desperately trying to persuade Esther not to cross the road or visit the neighbor's house again. But as exasperating as her behavior was, I always had to remind myself that she wasn't being bad. She was just being herself. We either weren't handling the situation properly or weren't moving fast enough to prevent the problem before it happened. That's what made us feel so guilty. This behavior was her nature. She was biologically programmed to explore, and she was just doing her piggy thing. But we had to say no and be the bad guys, because she didn't understand why she couldn't go to certain areas, and we hadn't mastered pig speak enough to be able to explain it to her just yet. Note to self, Rosetta Stone for pig communication. So why weren't the fences up yet? Well, we knew what we needed to do. There just weren't enough hours in the day. It had never crossed our minds that with all the space we had at this new farm, it still wouldn't be enough. Esther's nature to explore was even stronger than we'd thought. She could freely roam around 10 acres, but because she was denied the extra 10 acres of the forest, she was livid. This experience really brought home how brutal existence must be for an unlucky breeding sow, which under ordinary circumstances, Esther would have been. She was just lucky not to have that agonizing life. Commercial pigs live in gestation crates that are 2.5 by 6 feet. All they can do is sit or lie down on concrete floors or metal slats mounted to the crates. They can't turn around. Many industrialized barns don't even have windows to offer natural sunlight. The poor animals that live in such barns are completely devoid of any form of stimulation, never mind any chance to explore, satisfy their instinct to root, or build nests for their babies. And if you can imagine, these pigs live confined like that for 2.5 to 3 years before finally being butchered. Mother pigs keep their babies for 4 to 6 weeks before the babies are taken away to a finishing barn, where they'll stay until they reach market weight around 6 to 8 months of age. Mom will be left without babies for 2 weeks before being impregnated again to start the whole cycle over. These sweet creatures can literally be driven into madness from lack of activity and just plain depression. Had Esther been a breeding sow, her life would have been over by now. But here at 2.5 years of age, her life at the farm was just beginning. When Esther was asked to turn around and stop a day's exploration, she wasn't just irritated, she was furious. Curbing her impulse to roam was not like dealing with a dog. You yell at the dog, it knows it has misbehaved, and then it's over. Esther's drive to investigate and dig was so strong that it led to major physical altercations. To then think about how commercial farm pigs are treated and what they must feel is heartbreaking, especially when you think of how smart these animals are. You have to consider what's going through their minds as they're trapped in these prisons. Only a few kinds of animals can recognize themselves in their reflection and understand the function of a mirror. Pigs, dolphins, chimpanzees, and humans. Dogs think mirrors are windows. Then again, dogs think poop is food, so it could be worse. Pigs are so much smarter than most people realize. Studies at Pennsylvania State University have shown that pigs learn to play video games as fast as chimpanzees and more quickly than 3-year-olds. Children, not animals. Pigs use their snouts to move the joystick and play the games with more focus and success than chimps do. We've never tried to replicate any of the experiments we've read about online, but we can easily see how their results apply to Esther. At our old house, we marveled at her ability to open doors that were completely shut. She figured out how to easily operate a lever-style door handle with just her snout. We had never taught her that. She figured it out on her own. She did the same when we moved. A few days after we arrived, she could fling open the sliding patio door to go outside for a pee. We didn't even have sliding doors at our old house, yet she mastered them almost immediately. We often compare her to the dogs, particularly because of how she plays with her treat ball. The dogs have always had treat balls, and they always did the same thing with them. A dog would roll the ball around for a few minutes, but once the ball would get stuck somewhere or the dog would get bored, they would just abandon it. Or else the dog would just bark until we came to get the ball. But Esther would take a treat ball and walk in a straight line from one end of the room to the other until it was empty of treats. There was no comparison in her ability to master toys or solve problems. We had never seen anything like it. It was obvious that pigs are cognitively sophisticated creatures with a much deeper level of thought processing than we ever could have imagined. It's hard to think of all the unlucky pigs out there when we consider how much we love our girl. and that is still a huge part of why we continue our mission. But with this move and Esther's sudden behavior shift, I was starting to worry that this sweet little girl we knew and loved was gone. Beyond all of the logistical struggles with Esther's explorations and our disagreements, I was extremely upset about her attitude. This wasn't the pig I'd come to know. I worried that Esther was forever changed, or worse, that the rumors about how mean pigs can be actually might be true. I must admit there was another consideration as well. We had been presenting this image of Esther online that was nothing but sunshine and roses, and that had been perfectly accurate in her early years. But teenage Esther was a serious departure from the Esther everyone else knew and loved. Thousands of people had just helped us get to the farm, and we knew many had plans to visit and meet the star attraction. They'd fallen in love with this sweet girl just as Derek and I had. It would change everything if they came out to meet her and she chased them, or heaven forbid, if she became extremely aggressive toward them, which certainly was a possibility the way things were going. We wanted people to meet the Esther we'd known all this time, and she was making it really hard to arrange that. If her obstinate, her literally pig-headed behavior continued, we had no idea what we were going to do. Hey, Miss Pig. Hey? But that's over. She's a perfect piggy, isn't she? Say, yes, I am. Yes, I am. Daddy's perfect piggy. Yes. Good girl. Yeah?